Greetings, everyone. I'm your host, King Crucial the Great. I got my co-host here today, King Chaos the Great. Welcome to the stage, my
Yo,
brother. If you haven't already, like, subscribe, hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest updates and posts. And today, we're gonna be digging into a person who we've done a whole lot of talking about on this platform as of late, Mr. Elon Musk himself. We're gonna check out the history of him, pretty much where his parents come from, what they were all about, and as Chaos admitted to last week, sometimes you have to look back on things to see where they're going. So, without further ado, I'll pull up the link and we can get into that. I'm gonna be writing my notes, and yeah, y'all let us know what you think in the comments. Chaos, anything you want to add? Okay.
no, I'm here to learn. I have not viewed any of this yet, so this is all fresh info for me.
Well, with this being all fresh info for you, I have a couple of questions for you before we get started.
Okay.
So, one, you earlier in a episode, you made the statement that a person's personal life have nothing to do with the job that they do, right?
Right.
And I solely agree with that.
Somebody
For just
currently
for the
being
record,
somebody capable of handling the task right now has nothing to do with their past.
and I
Okay.
totally agree with that for the record. But I also have another question. Do you think people could do good things for bad reasons?
Oh yes, for sure. Bad people do good things for bad reasons. Bad people can do good things for good reasons. Intention and categorizing someone as good or bad, those are very gray areas.
Intention, that is a lovely word. I love that word because that pretty much correlates everything that this is going to be about. So without further ado, let's get into the video. Shout out to Democracy Now for providing us with the content.
Part 2 of my recent interview with the reporter Chris McGreal, who was the Johannesburg correspondent for The Guardian during the last years of apartheid through 2002. He's been closely following the South African-born billionaire Elon Musk, who was born in 1971 in Johannesburg, South Africa, and raised under the country's racist apartheid laws. Some of McGreal's pieces include what does Elon Musk believe and how the roots of the PayPal mafia extend to apartheid South Africa. I began by asking Chris McGreal to discuss Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman.
We see Musk's grandfather, Joshua Haldeman. He immigrates to South Africa in 1950, and that's really when apartheid's just starting to kick in. The 1950s are when the first laws, South Africa had discriminatory laws before, but you see the specific apartheid laws, which are much more aggressive, and in many ways reminiscent of the Nazi Nuremberg laws against Jews in the 1930s. They have very similar echoes in stripping black people from the right to work in certain places, their movements, controlling them, confining them to areas. You already had a situation which is now, come to the fore because of recent events with Trump. But
you mean with Elon Musk giving the Nazi salute?
Yes, but also with the sanctions over land. The 1913 Land Act had already deprived most black people of land in South Africa anyway. At that point, the 7% or 10% as it was of the population that was white owned more than 85% of the land under the Land Act of 1913. So the apartheid laws kick in the 1950s.
So I wanna break down what apartheid is, because for a lot of the viewers, I'm pretty sure They have no idea what that is. I didn't know what it was. So let me pull it up, give you the official definition of it.
You said what?
No, I was telling you to pause it. Apartheid laws were a system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination enforced by the South African government from 1948 to the early 1990s. These laws classified people into racial groups, primarily white, black, colored, and Indian, and severely restricted rights from non-white civilians. Key apartheid laws: Population Registration Act 1950 classified all South Africans by race. Group Areas Act in 1950 designated separate residential and business areas for different races, forcibly removing non-whites from white areas. All right. Bantu Education Act in 1953 created racially segregated and inferior education system for Black South Africans. Past laws required non-whites to carry pass books and restrict their movement in white areas. Apartheid ended through negotiations and internal pressure, leading to democratic elections in 1994 when Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first black president. So that's just a little background on apartheid law. It's pretty much
I mean,
segregation, in other
that's
words.
just for I mean, you just kind of caught up everybody who didn't keep up with history because your parents weren't super duper Nelson Mandela fans.
Hey,
Like
hey, we dropping gems, man. We ain't doing no judgment. I
my
ain't know
daddy was a huge Nelson Mandela fan, and so I had to hear and watch everything pertaining to that was available. But yeah, that was a torch. It was not a brag. That was not a flex. That was a flashback, I guess.
that was a truth.
And linked to the Nazis in Germany, it was responsible for all kinds of attacks, but including burning Jews out of their businesses in Johannesburg.
And we're talking about what years?
In the 1930s, so the late 1930s. And then South Africa goes to war as an ally of Britain against Hitler. The OB and the groups that support them, like Forster, people like Forster, they actively oppose that. They actually are in touch with, OB is in touch with German military intelligence, and they plan to assassinate the Prime Minister of South Africa, Jan Smuts, and overthrow the government and have it support Hitler. That plan fails because the Germans are unable to provide the necessary weapons and back out. But in 1942, John Forster, later Prime Minister, stands up and gives a speech, and he talks about the system that their kind of ideological belief system, which was Christian nationalism. And he says, Christian nationalism in South Africa is the same as Nazism in Germany and fascism in Italy. It's all anti-democratic. It's all the same thing. By 1971, when Elon Musk is born, that man is the Prime Minister of South Africa. And Christian nationalism is the basis of not only the political philosophy, but the entire education system that Elon Musk is brought up into.
So take us from Elon Musk's grandfather and moving to South Africa in the 50s to his father, how they gained their wealth.
So Elon Musk's grandfather moves there in the 1950s. He's not particularly prosperous. He arrives without a lot of money, but it's Elon Musk's father, Errol, who makes the real money, principally through investments in emerald mines in Zambia. And mining conditions in southern Africa in that period were really pretty dire in the 1960s and 70s. Very high death rate, very poor conditions, but the owners got very rich. And Musk lived what can only be described as a neo-colonial life. If you were white South African in that period and you had any money at all, you lived with servants at your beck and call. You lived in sprawling housing. And what you see with Elon Musk is that when we get a glimpse into just how much money he had when he and Elon's mother get divorced. She says at the time that, well, he owns a yacht, he owns a jet, he owns several houses. So there was considerable wealth there.
Was the grandfather of Elon Musk on the record in his support for Forster?
Well, he was certainly on the record in his support for apartheid, very vividly so, yes. And he said that that's why he'd moved to South Africa from Canada in 1940 was in support of it. Now, the grandfather himself is killed a few years later in a plane crash, but is not known what Elon Musk's grandmother's personal views of Forster particularly were, but they were both avid supporters of the apartheid system, and the grandmother lived for a number of years afterwards.
So you've been talking about Elon Musk's maternal grandparents and how they moved to South Africa, but talk about their roots in Canada.
Originally, the grandparents have no connection to South Africa. They're born and grew up in Canada. And in the 1930s, the grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, he's head of the Canadian branch of a US movement called Technocracy Incorporated. And Technocracy Incorporated is essentially a movement to overthrow democratic government in the United States and have technocrats, but big businessmen in many ways, come in and run the country. That's partly a reaction to FDR's election and New Deal and massive reforms that he's introduced in the United States.
So from Canada, they would help to launch a coup against FDR?
No, the Canada had its own branch of this movement to overthrow the government in Canada.
He dropped a lot on us right there. Are you familiar with that word?
What word? I just got back on this. Got back. I had to run outside real fast.
Oh man.
Woo.
Lock in. All right. Technocracy.
It's daytime. Responsibilities.
Oh man, you should have said that.
Now I didn't know.
Technocracy.
Yeah.
All right. So basically, run back the last 30 seconds.
All right.
Connection to South Africa. They're born and grew up in Canada. And in the 1930s, the grandfather, Joshua Haldeman.
No.
There was considerable wealth there.
Was the grandfather of Elon Musk on the record in his support for Forster?
Well, he was certainly on the record in his support for apartheid, very vividly so, yes. And he said that that's why he'd moved to South Africa from Canada in 1940 was in support of it. Now, the grandfather himself is killed a few years later in a plane crash, but is not known what Elon Musk's grandmother's personal views of Forster particularly were, but they were both avid supporters of the apartheid system, and the grandmother lived for a number of years afterwards.
So you've been talking about Elon Musk's maternal grandparents and how they moved to South Africa, but talk about their roots in Canada.
Originally, the grandparents have no connection to South Africa. They're born and grew up in Canada. And in the 1930s, the grandfather, Joshua Haldeman, he's head of the Canadian branch of a US movement called Technocracy Incorporated. And Technocracy Incorporated is essentially a movement to overthrow democratic government in the United States and have technocrats, but big businessmen in many ways, come in and run the country. That's partly a reaction to FDR.
Okay, I see where you're coming from.
Okay, then fill me in. What you think about that?
It's a very real thing. I didn't know it had a name. That's my first time being exposed to its name. But All
right, so here's the definition of it. Technocracy is a system of governance in which decision-making is led by technical experts, scientists, engineers, and other professionals rather than elected politicians or business leaders. The idea is that policy should be based on data, logic, and expertise rather than political ideology or popular opinion. So with that being said, can you see the how can I similarities in technocracy and what Elon is doing with our government today.
Yeah, okay. Totally can see the similarities, but I can also see the contrast.
Okay, fill me in on that.
Contrast is he's not running the country. He's literally advising. Like his position is that of counseling. Like he's not even like his appointment is to regulate people that are in place. Like he didn't replace somebody who already had a job. They gave him a new job in order to supervise the regulation of the jobs available. Basically, is how I feel.
But
And
he's using
the same tactics from the system that is potentially terrorist. Like, totally get it. Yeah. And I totally see where this could be potentially dangerous and where we could possibly be leaning towards that sort of society with the actions that we've been dealing with Elon involved with our government. Totally could see it, especially seeing that that's how he was raised.
Well, with that being said, the key features of technocracy include expert-driven leadership. Decisions are made by specialists in fields, economics, engineering, and healthcare. Data-driven policies, we said that. Emphasis on using scientific method, technology, and objective analysis to solve societal problems. Hold on, that's a word. Depoliticization of governance. Reducing the role of political parties and elections in favor of rational, efficient administration. Technocratic elements can be found in modern governments, especially in areas like central banking, the Federal Reserve, environmental policy, and public health. However, critics argue technocracy can be undemocratic if it excludes public participation and concentrates power in unelected experts.
So if the experts are running it without public influence, that totally makes sense. Okay, and I see it on paper. On paper, it sounds beautiful. It sounds like an excellent system.
But in practice, it could be dangerous.
It could be quite dangerous.
I just wanted to throw that bone out there. Y'all let us know what y'all think in the comments.
FDR's election and New Deal and massive reforms that he's introduced in the United States.
So from Canada, they would help to launch a coup against FDR?
No, Canada had its own branch of this movement to overthrow the government in Canada. Haldeman heads that branch. And through the 1930s, it takes on increasingly fascist overtones. They start wearing grey uniforms, modeled on the Nazi brown and black shirts. And so when Canada declares war on Germany in 1939 alongside Britain, the movement is banned because it's clearly sympathetic to Hitler. Then Haldeman is arrested.
Elon Musk's grandfather.
Elon Musk's grandfather is arrested. They find documents sympathetic to the Nazis and
it just gets more and more interesting every 30 seconds. It's like I don't know if I should be laughing or crying. Has this group been considered a terrorist organization at any point?
Bro, to be completely honest with you, this is my first time even hearing about the group. That's why I definitely wanted to bring that to the table and talk to you.
I'm gonna hit play. Hold on, get it a little deeper.
Like, subscribe.
Other subversive documents inside his house, and he is sent to prison for a few months and then remains on essentially a subversion watch list for the rest of the war. Yeah, so he's basically regarded as a Nazi sympathizer, a fellow traveler.
And about a decade later, he moves to South Africa. Why?
So after the war, he founds another political movement which has deep anti-Semitic roots and actually promotes the forgery, the protocols of the
Elders of Zion.
Elders of Zion, that's it. But obviously, after the war and the Holocaust, there's no real appetite for that in Canada. It's a failing political movement. And so his eye casts down to South Africa. By 1950, the apartheid government has been in power for 2 years. And Haldeman looks at it and thinks that's just my kind of place, which clearly that was what he would want to create in Canada and had been trying to create in the 1930s. And so that's the point at which he and his wife, May, they move to South Africa and become very fervent supporters of apartheid.
Now, I wanted to blend in some breaking news in addition to cutting off all aid to South Africa, news of the region, and that is Sam Nujoma, the freedom fighter turned president who led Namibia to independence from apartheid South Africa in 1990, has died at the age of 95, often referred to as Namibia's founding father, known for his motto, a united people striving to achieve a common good for all members of the society will always emerge victorious. Used to be called Southwest Africa, became the independent Namibia. Talk about Sam Nujoma and how that fits into this picture of South Africa through apartheid.
So Sam Nujoma was the head of the Southwest Africa People's Organization, which was the liberation movement of Namibia. SWAPO, indeed. Really, SWAPO takes off and is able to have effect after Angola becomes independent with the fall of the Portuguese dictatorship. The Portuguese colonizers leave Angola, and Angola provides a base then for SWAPO to really fight to liberate Southwest Africa. That becomes known as the Border War. Euphemistically, the South Africans call it the Border War. They actually invade Angola in an attempt to overthrow the Marxist-leaning government of Angola, but also to keep SWAPO at bay. But the war goes on, and eventually South Africa loses that war. At that period, though, one of the things you see is that Peter Thiel, another member of the PayPal mafia, a very close friend of Musk, he had been at school in Johannesburg, but his father gets a job on a uranium mine near Swakopmund in what is then Southwest Africa. And so Peter Thiel moves there as a child and goes to school there. And the thing to know about Southwest Africa, or the reason it was separate from South Africa, is that it had been a German colony until the end of the First World War. Then it becomes falls under South Africa's mandate, partly because at that point South Africa was a British colony. When South Africa becomes a republic in the 60s, it hangs on to Southwest Africa and it becomes a South African colony. But the population, big part of the population was of German ancestry. And you could, I remember going to Windhoek in the early 90s, and the main thoroughfare through Windhoek was called Hermann Goeringstrasse, named not after the Luftwaffe chief, but after his father, who had been a governor of German Southwest Africa. In Swakopmund, it was even more extreme. It was notorious for many, many years, really into the 80s and 90s, as a hotbed of open support, continued support for the Nazis and for Hitler. The New York Times has a story from the mid-70s of a reporter pulling up at a gas station to get his car filled with gas, and the attendant openly giving a Nazi salute and saying Heil Hitler to him. You could go to curio shops in Swakopmund and they would sell Nazi-themed mugs and flags and things, and they openly celebrated Hitler's birthday every May. Thiel went to a German school there, so that's the atmosphere he grows up in. His father is an official on a uranium mine there. And the interesting thing about the uranium mine, amongst many other things, is that it supplied part of the uranium to develop the South African atomic bombs in the 1970s, which were developed in league with Israel. Now, part of the deal with Israel was that is that South Africa would deliver yellow cake uranium to Israel. We don't know where the yellow cake came from. It may have come from that Swakopmund area mine, or it may have come from somewhere else in South Africa. But South Africa was shipping yellow cake to Israel at the same time because it too was developing nuclear weapons.
And talk about what.
Boy, you dropped the load on us just then, boy.
Well, I knew you was gonna like that part.
All right, let's break that down. So he grew up in a town in South Africa where they were heavily influenced by neo-Nazi culture, so to speak, right?
Yes.
Do you believe that there's a possibility that any of that rubbed into the man that we have before us today?
Okay.
Like even an ounce of it.
Wait. Okay, wait. Okay. All right, there's two angles to that, right? That I feel are valid.
Talk to me.
So the first one is not such a big dagger to me, I don't believe. But I feel like some of the strongest anti-slave speakers and activists in the United States have been white men raised by white slave culture.
Like who? Talk to me.
Cassius Clay. The original Cassius Clay, the one that the boxer Muhammad Ali was named after.
Bro, you went that far back?
I'm just saying, if it wasn't for that gentleman, I'm pretty sure nobody else could have forced Lincoln to sign the the emancipation of slaves. And that is literally to the point that I'm making. But on the other hand, the reason why the Confederate movement lasted as long as it did is because of white women, or the mothers, daughters, and wives of the men that died in a losing war.
See, I see how you beating around the bush of the question.
I don't beat around bushes. I chop them down.
Yeah, you beating all around the bush. I'm talking about with a straight fly swatter, side, front, back, all of that. You hitting all around the bush, dog. Question is, do you think the slightest of the environment and culture that Elon was raised in has anything to do with the person that he is today?
For sure. It is possible he is hiding the worst of it from the world so that we don't panic.
That was my only question, bro. Yes, you product of your environment one way or the other, bro. You either gonna be the best product out of it, or you're gonna be the worst. There's really no in between. Especially when dealing with neo-Nazism and this and that. So yeah, that was my question. I just wanted to know if you think maybe he might, it may not be nothing drastic. He might just count all the black people in the building in the room when he walk into it, like 1, 2, 3. Okay, it's 3. And
that's why I'm
there's
saying
nothing wrong with that. I do it.
He may identify as an African American.
Stop.
Between his baby mama drama and his lack of concern of how authority views him, I'm just saying.
What, and
He
being
is
born
from
in
the-
Africa too?
I'm just saying they're treating him like one, and he legit was born in Africa, right? And now he's migrated to America. He is more African American than I am.
Bro, I can't. I can't with. Hey, you got that one, bro. Hey,
Saying, bro.
start the video back, man. You got it. You got it, bro. Oh my god.
Peter Thiel has said about all this. You know, I remember as we cover conventions for decades now, Peter Thiel standing up at the first Republican convention that nominated President Trump and, you know, supporting him and who he is.
So Peter Thiel has said of his time in Swakopmund, and particularly the school, which he describes as particularly a brutal education, that it turned him against government and into a libertarian. And I think that's an interesting element in all of this, is that one of the things that isn't necessarily appreciated outside of South Africa is that there's two kinds of whites there. There's the Afrikaners who we've been talking about, but there's a big English-speaking white population. And one of the aspects of the English-speaking population was they, on paper, said they opposed apartheid, but they gained all of its benefits. And most of them, certainly not all, there were some really heroic individuals, but most of them did very little to actually end apartheid.
Okay, so I just want to say that is a oh duh moment for me, because there are a lot of whites here in America that on paper oppose slavery and segregation and all kind of stuff, but felt that they could do little about actually solving the problem, and they benefited from all of the processes of the societal structure.
Right.
So, well, just wanted to say that's apartheid and the civil rights movement are very similar in a lot of ways, but there are going to be some very key differences, especially on how harshly the African society is still eating the negative effects of it, while in America there are still pockets, but in general speaking, we are more or less free to move as we want to, and we're more stuck in a classist system, less so of a racist system, if that
Right.
makes sense.
Because at least they got their land. They getting their land back.
Right. We will never in America be even a hair closer to 40 acres and a mule than we've been
You know
for
why?
100 years. Huh.
Because that's how they got started.
Right.
They bought that one piece of land in New York. They were like, "Oh, you want to buy land?"
Mhm.
Oh, ancestors were like, "Yeah, y'all can have that land if you want to buy some land. Yeah, go ahead."
Mhm. Craziness. But I just wanted to put
Yeah.
that out there. Here you go.
But one of the products of that is you have people like Musk and Thiel who have done very well and whose parents did very well out of the apartheid system, who deny responsibility for it. They blame it on the Afrikaners. They blame it on a extreme right-wing government. But then they have to explain how it is that their own parents were so able to do so well out of apartheid. And then they put that down to individual talent, that they're naturally gifted, and that leads them down this whole libertarian path, anti-government path, because essentially they have to explain how they too were benefits of apartheid without taking responsibility.
And talk about their relationship, Peter Thiel and Elon Musk.
Well, they're co-founders of PayPal together. They both essentially share the same kind of worldview, from what I can make out. They're, libertarians. They're very opposed to any kind of DEI. You've seen their deep hostility to DEI. I think Thiel buys into the same message about anti-white, the war on white people in South Africa that South African white groups like AfriForum have been pushing in the United States. So I think that philosophically they're very similar, and obviously they have a very close relationship.
And then talk about David Sachs and talk more specifically about what you're referring to as the PayPal mafia. I don't think most people in this country understand all of these connections and this unusual situation where these what some of the wealthiest men in the world worked together, founded PayPal, and now surround the president of the United States.
Yeah, so David Sachs was born in Cape Town in the 70s. And he moves, his parents take him to Tennessee when he's 5 years old. So he didn't grow up in the same milieu as Musk and Thiel, but he did grow up in the white South African diaspora for sure. He clearly shares the same views. You know, as you say, they're part of the PayPal mafia. They all get rich from the creation of this company. They're all at the top running it. And now Sachs has emerged as Trump's AI and crypto czar. Again, part of the same project. So you can see this.
And he was a chief fundraiser for President Trump, as you said, born in Cape Town.
Yes, a big. So they've all emerged with essentially, from what I can make out, the same philosophy. And of course, that's only been reinforced by their success. They're convinced, obviously, of their own genius and worth, and that government, whether it's South African government or in this case it seems to be the US government, is an obstacle to success.
And then we talked about it in part one, finally Roelof Botha, making this little quartet, white men of a certain age together, and his history also a part of the PayPal mafia.
Yes, he's part of it, and he has not emerged as a open supporter of Trump. I'm not entirely sure what his personal views are on this, but he does have a very interesting background. His grandfather was Pik Botha, who was the last foreign minister of apartheid South Africa. And Pik Botha's job essentially was to go around the world, particularly the West, and assure them that apartheid was being amended, was being dismantled, when in fact it was in many ways, although what was known as petty apartheid, which was the routine discriminations, the segregation, was being dismantled. In fact, the political system was actually only reinforcing it, solidifying it. The government of the time cooked up a system of 3 parliaments that would represent different parts of the population, but and give some people who weren't white a vote, but none of those people were black. There was no black parliament, partly because they were being pushed into the independent homelands. The idea was that they were no longer South African anyway. So Pik Botha went around trying to apologize and excuse for this system, and he was successful with conservatives. He saw a lot of Reagan and people; they loved him here, and the same with Thatcher in Britain. They saw them as the acceptable face of apartheid. And he was so deluded by the end, he was convinced. I remember meeting him during the era of the transition to democracy from apartheid. He was so convinced that he was indispensable to the system that Mandela would have to appoint him foreign minister, which he duly did not.
Would you say the background of all these men's families was fleeing Mandela's South Africa?
Well, some of them left before. I mean, it's worth noting that Elon Musk left in 1988 at the age of 18, just as he would have become eligible to be drafted into the South African army, as all white males were at that point, which might have led him to fight the border war that I was talking about in Angola against SWAPO, or it might have led him into the townships, which at that point were in complete ferment. And, you had a huge amount of civil unrest in South Africa at that point. The country had largely become ungovernable. It was under a state of emergency, and the white troops were trying to keep some form of order in the black townships like Soweto. He left before he had to do any of that.
So very interestingly, for people who aren't aware,
Now I know a lot of people are going to have a field day with that. The fact that it looks like he ran away from military service. But again, I say, he is not in the leadership position of our country. He is in a clerical position in our country, and as long as he maintains a job to do, he's fine where he's at. But just like with anybody, you don't want just anybody all in your business unless they have a good reason. And auditing this missing money is a great reason to have somebody who has a history of being a stickler in that position. But it is kind of scary to think that he may be secretly working in the same capacity his father and grandfather were, as far as trying to overthrow governments and making it uh, less influenced by the people. That's kind of a dangerous position to be in.
Right, because I'm all for, eliminating bureaucracy, but more so making the roots of democracy deeper than, what they are. And I mean a true democracy, not this whole democratic idea of democracy, which is, oh yeah, we run and campaign against each other, and then don't matter who win, we still gonna be at odds with each other. There's no camaraderie, no cooperation with, the parties. They're always warring with each other instead of doing their jobs and bettering American people's lives.
Right.
And that's and like I said, I don't look at Elon Musk to be some type of war hero or something. He's a brainiac. You get what I mean?
Right. Businessman.
So at the same time, yeah, he got a foot up on us because his pops was mining those minerals and all the uranium up out of Africa, so to speak.
I mean, but at the same time, we can look at it as good experience. You know what I'm saying? Who's better for us to understand the mineral deals going on and making sure the money lines up and makes sense all the way around than somebody who was actually like
And you can
raised
look
up.
at it also as someone with experience in exploiting a lesser country for their natural resources. And then you can take a look at the US and Ukraine, what's going on. But
Yeah, the
that's
U.S.
different. They owe
is
us.
well, I'm saying U.S. and Ukraine is exactly what I was talking about though, because I'm feeling like he grew up in the game. His peoples made sure he was um well handled in the arena.
Same thing what you see with Lil X, how he's running around the White House and this and that.
Right,
What you think he's
right,
training for?
right. And when he gets up in position, he might end up with a really good heart and could change the world for the better. You know what I'm saying, in a really big way, like his dad seems to be doing until if or when we find out different.
Right. But yeah, that's pretty much all I wanted to share up out of that video. I just wanted to share a little bit of history. We always talking about Mr. Elon in such a positive light on the podcast. So it's about due to show a little bit of the dark side of him, if you're willing to call it that. It's just history.
Right.
Anything else you'd like to add for us, Chaos?
No, I was really satisfied on that information. I could tell that the gentleman giving the information had a very he has a very personal dislike of them.
Yeah, I kind of sensed that as well. It felt a little personal, but
Yeah, like maybe he got
at the same time, it was still informational. So for that, I can salute. And with that, this has been another episode of the Table of Greatness. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell to stay updated. And until the next time, as always, think with greatness.